The stars had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires, but none had ruled the Orion Arm longer than the Vessery Dominion, a coalition of 12 alien species that had dominated this region of space for 40,000 years, and in all that time, they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Ambassador Zyrith Kavalim stood aboard his diplomatic vessel, reviewing the data files on these newcomers called humans. And he found nothing impressive about them at all, for they were a young species, barely 300 years into interstellar travel, with only 47 warships to their name and a handful of colonies scattered across nearby star systems. The Dominion, by contrast, commanded 12,000 warships and had conquered over 200 species throughout their long history. So when the High Council decided that humanity would make excellent servants, Zyrith accepted the mission to deliver their ultimatum with complete confidence. His ship arrived at the human space station called Artemis Gate, a structure orbiting a blue gas giant at the edge of human territory, and as he docked his vessel, he noticed how small and primitive everything looked compared to Dominion architecture. Humans who greeted him were strange creatures, soft-skinned and fragile-looking, walking on two legs with no natural armor or weapons on their bodies. And Zyrith wondered how such weak beings had even survived long enough to reach the stars. They led him to a conference room where a human female waited, and she introduced herself as Admiral Helena Vance, commander of the United Terran Navy, a title that almost made Zyrith laugh. For what kind of navy had only 47 ships? Helena Vance was tall for a human, with gray hair cut short and eyes the color of steel, and she watched Zyrith with an expression he could not quite read as he took his seat across the table from her. "I bring a message from the Vessery Dominion," Zyrith announced, his translator device converting his words into the human language. "Your species has been judged worthy of integration into our great civilization." Helena said nothing, so Zyrith continued with growing confidence. "You will surrender all your colonies to Dominion control immediately, and you will dismantle your entire military fleet within 1 standard year, and your people will accept their new role as a servant race, providing labor and resources for the greater good of the Dominion." He paused to let the weight of his words sink in, expecting to see fear or despair on the human's face. But Helena Vance simply leaned back in her chair and studied him with those cold gray eyes. "And if we refuse?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Zyrith felt a flicker of annoyance at her lack of proper respect, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. "Then the Dominion will be forced to take what we have offered to accept peacefully," he replied. "We have already positioned a fleet of 800 warships near your outer colonies, and they will begin their conquest within 1 cycle if you do not comply." Helena nodded slowly, as if she was actually considering her options, which Zyrith found almost amusing. For what options did she have against such overwhelming force? "Tell me something, Ambassador," Helena said, leaning forward slightly. "Have your historians ever studied human warfare?" The question caught Zyrith off guard, and he blinked his 4 eyes in confusion. "I fail to see the relevance of such a question," he answered. "The military history of a primitive species with 47 ships is hardly worth studying." Helena smiled then, and something about that smile made Zyrith feel uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. "That is exactly what I expected you to say," she replied. "Your Dominion has conquered 200 species, and I imagine most of them surrendered quickly once they saw your superior numbers, because most species are sensible enough to recognize when they are outmatched." "Indeed," Zyrith agreed, feeling slightly better about the direction of the conversation. "Resistance against the Dominion is futile and wasteful. But here is what your historians would have learned if they had bothered to study us," Helena continued, her voice growing harder. "Humans do not surrender, Ambassador. Not ever. Not to anyone. And the species that have tried to conquer us throughout our history learned that lesson in blood and fire. Xyrath felt his confidence waver for just a moment before he steadied himself. "You speak of conflicts on your homeworld," he said dismissively. "Primitive wars between primitive nations using primitive weapons. But you have never faced anything like the Dominion, and you have never faced anything like humanity," Helena replied. "Tell me, Ambassador, have you heard of the Thunderclass?" Xyrath searched his memory, but found nothing. "I have not," he admitted. "Another one of your 47 small warships?" Helena laughed, and the sound sent a chill through Xyrath's body that he did not understand. "The Thunderclass is not counted among our 47 warships," she explained, "because the Thunderclass is not really a warship at all. Not in the way you understand the term." "Then what is it?" Xyrath demanded. Growing tired of these games, Helena stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the stars with an expression that seemed almost sad. "The Thunderclass is what happens when a species spends thousands of years perfecting the art of killing," she said quietly. "It is what happens when we take everything we learned from our endless wars against each other and build it into a single machine of absolute destruction." She turned back to face him. "Go back to your fleet, Ambassador, and deliver our answer to your High Council," Helena said. "Tell them that humanity declines their generous offer of slavery, and tell them that if they want our worlds, they are welcome to come and try to take them." Xyrath rose from his seat, his anger finally breaking through his diplomatic training. "You are making a terrible mistake," he warned. "The Dominion will crush your pathetic species." "Perhaps," Helena agreed. "But before you attack, I suggest you send a scout to the Kepler system and look behind the 7th planet. Because there is something waiting there that your 800 ships should see before they make any decisions." Xyrath stormed out of the conference room without another word, convinced that he was dealing with a madwoman leading a doomed species. 3 days later, when Dominion scouts reported what they found hiding behind the gas giant Kepler 7b, High Warlord Thiessen refused to believe the readings at first, because nothing that size could possibly exist. And yet there it was, a single ship 12 kilometers long, waiting in the darkness like a predator ready to strike. The thunder had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same again. High Warlord Thiessen had commanded Dominion fleets for over 300 years, and in all that time he had never lost a battle, never retreated from an enemy, and never felt anything close to fear when facing inferior species. But as he stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the sensor readings from the Kepler system, he felt something cold and unfamiliar crawling up his spine. "This must be an error," he declared. Turning to his sensor officer, "Run the scan again." The officer complied, and the results came back identical to before, showing a single vessel hiding in the shadow of the gas giant Kepler 7b, a vessel that measured 12 kilometers from bow to stern, making it larger than any ship the Dominion had ever built. "The readings are accurate, High Warlord," the sensor officer reported, his voice trembling slightly. "The human ship is real." Thiessen studied the holographic display, examining the impossible vessel from every angle, and he noticed that its design was unlike anything in the Dominion database. With harsh angular lines and surfaces covered in what appeared to be thousands of weapon emplacements. "One ship," Thiessen muttered to himself. "They send one ship against 800, and they think this will save them?" He turned to address his fleet commanders, whose faces appeared on screens around the bridge. "The humans have built themselves a large target," he announced with forced confidence. "Nothing more. And we will destroy it along with the rest of their pathetic civilization." The Dominion fleet jumped to the Kepler system in perfect formation. 800 warships emerging from faster-than-light travel in a display of overwhelming military power. And Thiessen felt his confidence return as he surveyed his forces. Then the human ship moved out from behind the gas giant. And Thiessen got his first clear look at the thing called Thunderclass. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a predator built entirely of metal and weapons, and as it turned to face the Dominion fleet, Thiessen counted the gun batteries along its hull and stopped counting when he reached 1,000 because there were simply too many to track. "All ships, open fire," Thiessen commanded, deciding that the best strategy was to destroy this monster before it could act. 800 Dominion warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously, filling the void with plasma bolts and missile swarms and energy beams, all converging on the single human vessel in a storm of destructive power that should have vaporized anything in its path. Thiessen watched with satisfaction as the barrage struck the human ship, expecting to see it torn apart in seconds. But then his satisfaction turned to confusion and then to horror as the readings came back. The human ship was completely undamaged. Impossible, Thiessen shouted. Nothing can survive that kind of bombardment. But the Thunderclass had done more than survive, for its hull was now glowing with captured energy. And Thiessen realized with growing dread that the ship had somehow absorbed the entire attack. A communication channel opened, and a human face appeared on the main view screen. But something was wrong with this human, for his eyes glowed with blue light and circuit patterns traced across his skin like living tattoos. "I am Captain Marcus Cole," the human announced, his voice echoing with strange harmonics. "I am the UT Smilner, and you have made a terrible mistake coming here." Thiessen stared at the screen in confusion, unable to understand what he was seeing. "You are the ship?" he asked. "What does that mean?" "It means that I volunteered to merge my consciousness with this vessel," Marcus explained. "My thoughts control every weapon, every shield, every system, with no delay and no hesitation. Because I'm not commanding this ship, High Warlord. I am this ship." Thiessen had never heard of such technology, and he could not imagine any being willingly giving up their body to become a machine. But humans were clearly stranger and more dangerous than anyone had realized. "You absorbed our weapon's fire," Thiessen said, trying to buy time while his tacticians searched for weaknesses. "An impressive trick. But you cannot defeat 800 ships alone," Marcus smiled, and the expression looked wrong on a face that was no longer entirely human. "Your weapons use plasma and energy-based systems," Marcus replied. "My adaptive shielding analyzed your attacks in the first microsecond and redistributed the energy into my own power reserves. So I thank you for the gift. And now I will show you what human weapons look like." The Mjolnir's weapon batteries began to glow, and Thiessen felt true fear for the first time in his long life. "All ships, evasive action." He screamed, but he knew it was already too late. The Thunderclass unleashed its primary armament, the Thunderstrike arrays, which were railgun batteries that fired projectiles at 15% the speed of light, and at that velocity, the rounds crossed the distance to the Dominion fleet in less than a heartbeat. Thiessen watched in horror as the first volley struck his formation, and ships that had survived countless battles simply ceased to exist, torn apart by kinetic impacts, so powerful that their shields meant nothing, and their honor meant nothing, and their size meant nothing. 200 Dominion vessels died in the first 90 seconds, and Mjolnir was only getting started. "Launch all fighters," Thiessen ordered desperately. "Overwhelm it with numbers." But Marcus Cole had anticipated this strategy, and the Mjolnir's hull split open in dozens of places to release swarms of autonomous drones, 50,000 of them pouring out like angry insects, each one armed with plasma cutters and EMP charges. The drones tore through the Dominion fighter squadrons and then turned on the warships themselves, cutting through hulls and disabling systems with terrifying efficiency. And Thiessen realized that he was not fighting a ship at all, but an entire fleet compressed into a single nightmare. "Retreat," Thiessen ordered, abandoning his pride to save what remained of his forces. "All ships, jump to hyperspace immediately. But nothing happened, and his navigation officer turned to him with terror in his eyes. "We cannot jump." "High Warlord," the officer reported. "The human ship has activated some kind of interdiction field, and we are trapped here." Thiessen sank into his command chair as the reality of his situation became clear. For he had brought 800 warships to conquer a primitive species, and now those ships were dying around him while he could do nothing but watch. The battle lasted 3 hours. Though it stopped being a battle after the first few minutes and became something closer to an execution. And when it was finally over, only 94 Dominion ships remained operational. Drifting among the wreckage of their fallen comrades, Marcus Cole's face appeared on every surviving view screen. "Go home," he said simply. "Tell your masters what happened here. And tell them that Malner is the oldest and smallest of our Thunder-class vessels, for we have 6 more. And we are building 12 after that." He paused to let his words sink in. "Tell them that humanity does not want war, but we are very good at it when war is forced upon us. And tell them that the next fleet they send will not be allowed to retreat." The interdiction field dropped, and the surviving Dominion ships fled into hyperspace, carrying with them a message that would shake the foundations of a 40,000-year-old. Empire High Warlord Thiessen sat alone in his quarters during the journey home, staring at nothing, and he kept repeating the same words over and over. They were ready for us. They were always ready for us, and we walked right into their trap like fools. The Thunder had spoken, and the galaxy had heard its voice. The Dominion Council chamber had not seen such chaos in over 10,000 years, with representatives from all 12 member species shouting and arguing and demanding answers, while the holographic display at the center of the room showed the battle footage from Kepler on endless repeat. Elder Counselor Mavis, the oldest and most respected member of the council, watched the recording for the 100th time, and each viewing made her feel more afraid than the last, because she had lived for 800 years and had never seen anything like the destruction that one human ship had caused. "This is a trick," shouted Representative Varrock of the Kesari Empire, his scales flushing red with anger. "The humans must have hidden additional ships somewhere, because one vessel cannot defeat 800. "There were no hidden ships," replied Ambassador Zyrith Kaivolume, who had returned from his failed diplomatic mission, looking pale and shaken. "Our sensors scanned the entire system multiple times, and there was only the one ship, the one they call Mjolnir. Then how do you explain this massacre?" Vorak demanded, gesturing at the holographic display where Dominion warships were being torn apart like Papper. Zyrith shook his head slowly. "I cannot explain it," he admitted. "I can only tell you what I saw and what I heard. And what I heard was Admiral Vance telling me that we had no idea what we were dealing with." High Warlord Thiessen stepped forward, his once proud bearing now bent with shame and defeat. "I led that fleet," he said quietly. "I have commanded Dominion forces for 3 centuries. And I tell you now that nothing in my experience prepared me for what the humans unleashed upon us." He activated his personal display, showing detailed sensor readings from the battle. "Their weapons fire projectiles at 15% of light speed," Thiessen explained. "At that velocity, our shields cannot form fast enough to block them, and our armor cannot absorb the kinetic energy. So every shot that hits us is a killing blow. Surely we can adapt our defenses," argued Representative Scylla of the Veth Collective, her luminous eyes flickering with concern. "We tried," Thiessen replied. "We tried everything we could think of during the battle, and nothing worked. Because their ship was not just firing blindly, but analyzing our responses and adjusting its attacks in real time." He paused, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Their captain told me that he had merged his mind with the ship, that he was the ship, and I believe him. Because no organic crew could coordinate weapons fire with such precision. The council chamber fell silent as the members absorbed this information. And Mavis could see the fear spreading from face to face as the reality of their situation became clear. "We need information," Mavis declared. Rising from her seat, "We have underestimated these humans badly, and we must learn everything about them before we decide our next course of action." She turned to the Intelligence Division representative. "I want a complete analysis of human history, culture, and military development on my desk within 2 days," she ordered. "Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it may seem." The Intelligence Division worked around the clock, accessing every database and archive that contained information about humanity. And what they found changed everything the Dominion thought they knew about this young species. 2 days later, Mavis sat alone in her private study, reading the intelligence report with growing horror, and by the time she finished, her hands were trembling so badly that she could barely hold the data tablet. The report revealed that humans had not achieved spaceflight through peaceful cooperation like most species in the galaxy, but had instead spent their entire history fighting brutal wars against each other, developing increasingly deadly weapons with each generation. They had created explosives that could level cities and poisons that could kill millions, and machines that could think for themselves. And they had used all of these weapons against their own kind without hesitation. The report described something called the World Wars, which had killed hundreds of millions of humans in just a few decades. And it described the nuclear age when humans had built weapons capable of destroying their entire planet and had come close to using them several times, but the most disturbing section of the report covered something called the Unification Wars, which had occurred 200 years ago, when human factions had fought for control of their solar system using weapons and tactics that made their earlier conflicts look primitive by comparison. The Thunder-class battleships were not developed to fight alien threats, the report stated. They were developed during the Unification Wars as planet-killing weapons designed to end conflicts quickly and decisively. And each Thunder-class vessel was built to hold an entire solar system against enemy fleets. Mavis set down the tablet and stared at the wall, trying to process what she had learned. The humans had not built these terrifying ships because they feared the Dominion, for they had built them long before they knew the Dominion existed. And they had built them because they feared each other. A species that constantly tried to destroy itself had developed weapons beyond anything the Dominion could imagine, simply to survive their own internal conflicts. Mavis called an emergency council session that night, and she presented the intelligence report to the assembled representatives, watching their expressions shift from disbelief to horror as the truth sank in. "We threatened a species that has been at war with itself since the moment they climbed down from the trees," Mavis concluded. "We demanded the surrender of people who would rather die than submit. And we sent 800 ships against a civilization that builds planet killers to settle internal disputes." "What are you saying?" asked Representative Vark, his earlier aggression now replaced by visible fear. "I am saying that we made a terrible mistake," Mavis replied. "I am saying that the humans showed us mercy by allowing our surviving ships to retreat. And I am saying that if we attack them again, they will not be so generous." Ambassador Zira spoke up, his voice hollow. "Admiral Vance asked me if our historians had studied human warfare," he said. "I dismissed the question as irrelevant, but now I understand what she meant." He looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. "She was giving me a warning," he continued. "She was telling me that if we studied their history, we would understand that fighting them was madness. And I was too arrogant to listen." The council debated for hours, with some members arguing for a massive military buildup and others calling for immediate peace negotiations. But as the arguments continued, one undeniable fact hung over every word: the humans had 7 Thunder-class battleships operational, with 12 more under construction, and their newest vessel was called Ragnarok, a name that the translation software defined as the end of everything. When Mavis finally called for a vote on how to proceed, the result was unanimous. The Dominion would seek peace with humanity, whatever the cost, because the alternative was extinction, and somewhere in the void, waiting in the shadow of a gas giant, the Mjolnir kept watch. Its hybrid consciousness, dreaming of stars and battle, and the hope that it would never need to fire its weapons again. 3 months had passed since the battle at Kepler, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted, with news of the Dominion's defeat spreading from system to system like wildfire, and species that had been conquered thousands of years ago suddenly looking at their masters with new eyes. Elder Councilor Mavis led the Dominion peace delegation personally, because she understood that this mission was too important to trust to anyone else. And she brought with her Ambassador Zereth and 3 other high-ranking officials, who had been carefully chosen for their diplomatic skills. Their ship approached the human station called Artemis Gate, the same station where Zereth had delivered his ultimatum 3 months earlier. And Mavis noticed that the humans had added significant defenses to the structure since then. "They are being cautious," she observed, "which suggests they are taking us seriously. Or they are preparing for another attack," Zereth replied nervously. "And we are flying directly into their weapons range." Mavis shook her head. "If the humans wanted to destroy us, they would have done so already," she said. "The fact that they agreed to this meeting means they want something other than war." The Dominion ship docked at the station, and the delegation was escorted through corridors filled with human soldiers, who watched them with expressions that were difficult to read. Neither hostile nor friendly, simply alert. Admiral Helena Vance waited in the same conference room where she had rejected the Dominion ultimatum, and she stood as the delegation entered, offering a formal greeting that Mavis appreciated for its professionalism. "Elder Counselor Mavis," Helena said, "I am pleased that the Dominion has chosen dialogue over conflict, as am I." "Admiral," Mavis replied, taking her seat across the table, "though I admit that I am also here because I wish to understand something." Helena raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "What do you wish to understand?" "I have studied your history extensively over the past 3 months," Mavis explained, "and I have learned about your wars, your weapons, and your remarkable capacity for violence. But I have also learned about your art, your music, your literature, and your capacity for kindness." She leaned forward slightly. "You are a species of contradictions, Admiral, capable of creating great beauty and terrible destruction in equal measure. And I wish to understand how both can exist within the same people." Helena was quiet for a long moment before she answered. "You are asking why we are not simply monsters," she said. "You are asking why a species that builds weapons like the Thunder class also writes poetry and composes symphonies." "Yes," Mavis admitted. "That is exactly what I am asking." Helena stood and walked to the window, a habit that Mavis had noticed she had. "We are not proud of our violent history," Helena said quietly. "Every war we have fought has left scars on our civilization that will never fully heal. And we carry the memory of our mistakes like a weight on our souls." She turned back to face the delegation. "But we also learned from those mistakes, slowly and painfully. And we built the Thunder-class battleships not because we wanted to use them, but because we hoped that having them would mean we never had to." "I do not understand," said Representative Scylla, who had joined the delegation. "If you did not want to use them, why build them at all?" "Because humans understand something that most species never learn," Helena replied. "We understand that peace must be strong enough to defend itself, or it will be destroyed by those who do not want peace." She returned to her seat. "The unification. Wars ended not because one side defeated the other, but because every side realized that continuing to fight would destroy humanity entirely. And when that realization came, we had a choice to make. What choice? Mavis asked. We could have disarmed completely, destroyed all our weapons, and hoped that no one would ever threaten us again, Helena explained. But we knew that hope was foolish, because the galaxy is vast and full of dangers. And a species without teeth is a species waiting to be eaten. She smiled slightly. So instead, we kept our weapons but changed how we thought about them, transforming them from tools of conquest into tools of protection. And we promised ourselves that we would never start a war, but we would always finish any war that was forced upon us. Mavis nodded slowly. Beginning to understand. You built the Thunder class as a deterrent, she said. You wanted potential enemies to see them and decide that attacking you was not worth the cost. Exactly, Helena agreed. And for 200 years, it worked, because no human faction was willing to risk facing those ships. And peace became normal instead of exceptional. But then we came along, Cyrus said bitterly. And we did not know enough to be afraid. You did not, Helena confirmed. And we hoped that our warning would be enough to turn you away. But when you attacked anyway, Captain Cole did what was necessary. She pressed a control on the table, and a view screen activated to show a human face with glowing blue eyes and circuit patterns across the skin. Elder Counselor Mavis, Helena said. Allow me to introduce Captain Marcus Cole. The consciousness of the Utz Mjolnir Mavis stared at the screen, struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. For Marcus Cole looked human, but also looked like something beyond human. Something that had transcended the limitations of flesh and become something new. Greetings, Elder Counselor, Marcus said, his voice carrying strange echoes. I apologize for the destruction I caused to your fleet, though I do not apologize for defending my people. How is this possible? Scylla asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. How can a consciousness exist within a machine? It is a process we call neural integration, Marcus explained. My original body died during the Unification Wars, but my mind was preserved and transferred into the Mjolnir's quantum core, where it merged with the ship's artificial intelligence to create something new. You chose to become a weapon, Mavis asked, unable to hide her horror. I chose to become a guardian, Marcus corrected gently. I chose to give up my humanity so that other humans would not have to. And I chose to carry the burden of violence so that they could live in peace. He paused, and his expression softened in a way that seemed almost sad. I have been the Mjolnir for 147 years, he continued. And in all that time, the battle at Kepler was only the third time I have fired my weapons in anger, because my presence alone is usually enough to prevent conflict. Mavis felt something shift in her understanding of these strange humans. You sacrifice individuals so that the whole may survive, she said. You turn your own people into weapons so that the rest can remain peaceful. We do what we must, Helena replied, and we hate that it is necessary. But we also accept it because the alternative is extinction. She leaned forward and looked Mavis directly in the eyes. Now let me tell you what we want from this meeting, Elder Counselor, because I suspect it is not what you expect. We expected you to demand tribute, territory, and submission, Mavis admitted. That is what the Dominion would demand after such a victory. Helena shook her head. We do not want to conquer you, she said. We do not want revenge, and we do not want to humiliate your people. Then what do you want? We want trade agreements that benefit both our civilizations, Helena answered. We want mutual defense treaties against common threats. And we want equal standing in galactic affairs. Mavis sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what she was hearing. You could enslave us, she finally said. You could take everything we have and reduce our species to servants, just as we threatened to do to you, and yet you offer partnership instead. Yes, Helena said simply. because we have been conquerors before, and it nearly destroyed us. And we swore that we would never become that again." She stood and extended her hand in the human gesture of friendship. "We offer you peace. Elder Counselor, real peace, not the peace of submission, but the peace of equals working together. And all we ask in return is that you never threaten humanity again." Mavis rose slowly and took the offered hand, feeling the warmth of human skin against her own scaled fingers. And in that moment she understood that everything she had believed about strength and power had been wrong. "You have given us much to consider, Admiral," she said, "and I believe that our council will accept your terms, because we would be fools to reject them." Helena smiled warmly. "Then perhaps there is hope for both our peoples after all." The treaty was signed within 1 week of the first meeting, and the galaxy watched in amazement as the mighty Vexery Dominion, which had ruled the Orion Arm for 40,000 years, accepted terms of equal partnership with a species that had only been traveling the stars for 3 centuries. News of the agreement spread rapidly, carried by traders and travelers and refugees who had fled Dominion space long ago. And everywhere the story was told, people spoke in hushed voices about the humans and their terrible thunderships. A new proverb emerged among the species of the galaxy, whispered in markets and shouted in taverns, repeated by children who had never seen a human and elders who had lived for centuries. "Let the humans sleep," the proverb went, "for when they wake, they shake the stars." 5 years passed, and the alliance between humanity and the Dominion grew stronger than anyone had expected, with trade flourishing between their worlds and cultural exchanges becoming common. As humans learned about alien art and aliens developed a taste for human music, Elder Counselor Mavis visited Earth during this time and walked among the humans she had once sought to enslave. And she was surprised to find that they welcomed her with curiosity rather than hostility, eager to share their world with their new partners. She stood in a human museum dedicated to their history of warfare and studied the weapons and artifacts from conflicts that had killed billions of her new friends' ancestors. And she finally understood why Admiral Vance had seemed sad when discussing human violence. These people remembered their sins, she realized, and they displayed them openly so that future generations would never forget the cost of hatred. Marcus Cole remained merged with the Mjolnir, watching over human space like a silent guardian, though he sometimes visited the station at Artemis Gate through holographic projection, engaging in conversations with anyone who wished to speak with him. Mavis sought him out during her visit and found him surprisingly easy to talk to, despite his strange existence as a hybrid of human and machine. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one evening as they watched the stars through a viewing port. "Do you ever wish you had let your consciousness die with your body?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when I remember what it felt like to touch another person, or taste food, or feel the warmth of sunlight on my skin. Sometimes I miss being human more than I can express." "Then why did you do it?" "Because someone had to," Marcus replied simply. "And because I believed that protecting others was worth any sacrifice, even the sacrifice of my own humanity." He turned to look at her with those glowing blue eyes. "I have watched over humanity for nearly 150 years now," he continued. "And in that time I have seen children born and grow old and die, generation after generation, living their lives in peace because they knew I was there to protect them." His voice softened. "That is worth any price, Elder Counselor. That is worth everything." 10 years after the treaty, when the Alliance had grown to include dozens of former Dominion subject species, a new threat emerged from beyond the galaxy. The craft came from the void between galaxies, a swarm of biological ships driven by hunger and hatred, and they fell upon the outer rim colonies like a plague of locusts, consuming everything in their path. The Dominion had never faced anything like the Krath in their 40,000 years of history, and their fleets were pushed back again and again, unable to stop the relentless advance of the alien swarm in the Dominion Council chamber, now shared with human representatives. The debate raged about how to respond to this existential threat. "We must abandon the Outer Rim," argued Representative Vorak. "Pull back our forces and establish a defensive line around our core worlds. If we retreat, the Krath will simply follow us," countered Admiral Helena Vance, who now served as the primary human liaison to the Council. "Running will only delay the inevitable," Elder Counselor Mavis, older now but still sharp of mind, rose to speak. "There is another option," she said quietly. "An option that the Dominion would never have considered before we met humanity." She looked at Helena with something like hope in her ancient eyes. "We can call the thunder." The Council fell silent, and Helena nodded slowly. "I will need to speak with Captain Cole," she said, "and with the other thunder pilots, but I believe they will agree." 3 days later, the Krath swarm arrived at the colony world of Thesan Prime, named after the High Warlord who had died defending it during an earlier battle, and found a Dominion fleet waiting to oppose them. But the Dominion ships were not alone. 7 massive vessels emerged from hyperspace behind the Krath swarm, ships so large that they dwarfed everything else on the battlefield, and the Krath immediately recognized them as the greatest threat they had ever encountered. The Mjolnir took position at the center of the formation, flanked by its younger siblings, the Valkyrie, the Tempest, the Olympus, the Prometheus, the Nemesis, and the newest and largest of them all, the mighty Ragnarok. Marcus Cole opened a channel to the entire fleet, both human and Dominion, and his voice rang out across the void. "We are the Thunder class," he announced. "We are the guardians of humanity, and now the guardians of all who stand with us. And we will not allow this threat to consume our friends." The Krath swarm responded by charging directly at the Thunder formation, millions of biological ships throwing themselves forward in a wave of mindless aggression. "All Thunder units," Marcus commanded, "weapons free." What followed would later be called the Battle of Thesan Prime, though calling it a battle was generous, for it was really more of a demonstration of what happened when the accumulated military genius of human history was unleashed without restraint. The Ragnarok alone destroyed 2 million Krath ships in the first hour, its massive railguns firing in coordinated volleys that carved highways of destruction through the enemy formation, while its drone swarms hunted down survivors with cold, mechanical precision. The other Thunder ships spread out to encircle the swarm, cutting off escape routes and systematically eliminating every Krath vessel that tried to flee. And the Dominion fleet watched in awe as their former enemies turned the tide of a war that had seemed unwinnable by the time the stars grew still again. Not a single Krath ship remained in the Thesan system, and the swarm that had threatened to consume the galaxy was reduced to drifting. Debris and fading energy signatures. Marcus Cole's face appeared on the view screen of every ship in the Allied fleet. "The Krath are broken," he announced. "But more will come, because the universe is vast and full of dangers, and there will always be those who see peaceful civilizations as prey." He paused, and his expression shifted to something that looked almost like pride. "But now they know that attacking us means facing the Thunder, and any species intelligent enough to travel between stars should be intelligent enough to understand what that means." Elder Counselor Mavis stood on the bridge of a Dominion cruiser, tears streaming down her scaled face, and she finally understood the gift that humanity had given the galaxy, not just protection, but hope that the future would be better than the past, that different species could work together instead of destroying each other, and that the terrible weapons born from human violence could be transformed into shields that protected everyone. She opened a channel to the Mauler Captain Cole. She said softly, "I want to thank you On behalf of the Dominion and all the species you have saved today. Marcus smiled. And for a moment he looked almost human again. You are welcome. Elder Counselor, he replied, and please remember this day. Because this is what happens when former enemies become true friends. He turned to look out at the stars, his glowing eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. Let the humans sleep, he quoted softly. For when they wake, they shake the stars. He paused. But we wake not to conquer, he added. We wake to protect, and that makes all the difference. Years later, when historians wrote about the rise of humanity and the transformation of the Dominion into a true galactic community, they always began with the same event, the day when 800 ships attacked a single human vessel and learned that defying humanity was insanity, and they always ended with the same lesson. A lesson that every species in the galaxy came to know by heart: never threaten humanity, never attack their friends, and never, ever forget what sleeps among the stars, waiting to wake and shake the heavens, for the thunder stands eternal watch, and the thunder never forgets.